take off, take flight with you. For we never fly, but we're flying.
Hey everyone, welcome back to episode number 96 of the Take Flight podcast. We are 4 episodes away from reaching a huge milestone. So I just want to say a big thank you to all of our listeners. A thank you to all of our supporters. Continue to stick with us, and we hope to continue sharing valuable information and experience from ourselves. Today is Take Flight Takeaways with myself, Pabilo. And I want to share a little bit about the importance of reading. Talk a little bit about my journey to becoming an advocate reader. What are some of the sort of advantages that I've experienced in the last couple of years of reading, and some techniques that I've tried. And also, I've got one drawback that I think will be interesting to share for the listeners to reflect on. So let's get into it. So for me, when I think about my entire journey, I have to start by saying I was never a fan of reading, right, in the beginning. From a very young age, I just didn't take to it, maybe like some other peers and children around me did. For whatever reason, maybe it was a lot to do with the fact that the books that I was sort of being presented with weren't sort of grabbing my interests. My dad pushed me almost every day to read, and I just couldn't actually understand sort of why it was so important to read. And actually, only until my early 20s, and maybe that's when even before I sort of started investing in my personal development, only into my early 20s did it start to click. But there were a few things that happened around me, a few signs that sort of got me closer to why reading is important. The first thing I would actually say is there was a talk given by a CEO of a division in the company that I work for, and someone asked him a question. And in part of his answer, he said, "You know, wherever I am, I always try to find time to read, whether I'm traveling, whether I'm at work." And that sort of resonated with me because he is leading, billions of dollars as a division. He's managing an incredible amount of people, and it was just interesting to hear him say something, as simple as that, which is what sort of gives him a lot of source of information. So that stuck with me. That was the first thing. The second thing actually was one of the persons in my circle, in my peers, very knowledgeable, well connected and understands world affairs, and I've always admired his wisdom. I've always admired his knowledge. And there was actually a time where he was selling his apartment, and he shared with me the pictures and said, "What do you think?" And I noticed in his apartment he had the entire wall from end to end was filled with books. And I thought, well, this is probably the contributor or the secret that you've never mentioned, maybe because it's so normal to him, as to why he is as knowledgeable as I sort of as he is, as I find him. So those were two signs for me that just thought maybe there's something in it. Maybe there's something that I'm missing, that I need to actually start reading books. So I started searching. I think that it created a curiosity, and I started to look online as to what's this all about. And so I came across various sources of information, and I started in 2017 reading a few books in the second half of the year, and it was great. I really started to get a source of inspiration, right? I started to expand my thinking. I started to believe, because you're reading, there's one of the things I'll say, and this speaks to a pro, is that there's no problem that hasn't already been solved. And everything you need is actually in a book. And so it's kind of like when you're reading, you're going through this discovery process of finding the nuggets that you need in your life at that moment in time to help you get through to the next stage. So I at the back end of 2017, I was convinced. I said, this is something that I need to do and need to do more of. And so I made a commitment in 2018 to read a book a week. And I think it's one of the best things I've ever done, because that has changed everything about the way I think, the way I believe, my purpose, what I'm motivated. I read a lot of how-to books, and it just made me overall a better person, a more valuable person. And so I'm just my biggest regret is the fact that I didn't actually start reading early enough. But no, it was great, and so I think those are some of the advantages that I've mentioned. I think if I was to spell out clearly some other advantages, I think a couple of things. One, the more you read, what you find is you're learning from other people's mistakes, people that have been there and done it, and you're cutting your own learning curve. I think that's a very very important piece to mention. The other thing also with reading that I found is you in a way you're simulating your future, right? You're picking up many different ideas that you can start to stitch together, and you can start to personalize in your own journey, and starts to get you there. So it starts to provide a map, a roadmap, as to where you want to go. After reading one book, it leads you on to another book, and then it starts to, it's kind of like this breadcrumbs that's taking you on a journey. Um, so if anyone who hasn't tried it, reading a book a week, I would highly recommend it. How I did it, honestly, I that was pretty much the only thing I did in 2018. So I read in the morning, I read in during my lunch breaks, I read when I was traveling, I read in the evening time, and most books were probably around 200, 300 pages. Some were less, some were more, and you could get through it if you was in that routine pretty quickly. I'll talk a little bit about one of the techniques that I picked up from an online mentor that worked out really well. Because I think one of the challenges with books is that people start reading and very quickly become bored with the content. And that shouldn't be your reading experience, right? Every book should actually give you inspiration. It should lift you. It should energize you. But it's obviously the way in which you go about it. So a couple of things. One, books that have been highly recommended, books that you've been looking forward to reading in some way or another. You'll end up reading those books from cover to cover, and you can't deny it when you're reading a book that actually has your interest, and you'll probably get through that pretty quickly. So that has your interest. But how about the books that have good information in there, but not necessarily from cover to cover? So one of the techniques that I found that works really well is really changing the rules around how we read, right? And so what tends to happen is they say that authors have spent a lot of time in the first chapter and also the last chapter. And so what you should do, one of the techniques you can try is scanning the contents page, so getting a good understanding of actually what's within the book, reading the first chapter, reading the last chapter, going back to the contents page, and then picking out the chapters that you think will be interesting for you at the journey that you're currently on. So if the book has, say, 10 chapters, right, you may read first and last, that's two. You may read a couple more, and and then you put the book back on the shelf. Now what you've done, you've actually read the book, right? Because what you now actually have done is you've picked up enough information for you to move on, but you've actually now got a good understanding and the memory of the remaining chapters that are in that book that you can come back to at a certain point in time. So this for me was a good technique on the books that I wasn't necessarily so interested on, but they actually had some good information. And books should be like a friend, right? You shouldn't necessarily just read it once and be done with. It should be like your reference points. As you build up a collection, you can sort of have your go-to books where you're actually pulling information out. You might be preparing for, I don't know, a conversation, or preparing for a mentoring session, and you know which books to go to in order to get information to prepare for that discussion. So yeah, that's just a little bit on the technique. I think maybe one of the last things I'd say before talking a little bit about the watch out item is to reread great books, right? One of the things I probably didn't do enough in 2018 is I was fascinated obviously with reading the book a week, and that meant a new book. But one of the things I'm learning now is actually to the books that for me are sort of my top picks, I should at least be reading those 3, 4, 5, 6 times. So yeah, so that's just a little bit on the story, some of the pros. And for me, I mean, anyone listening to this podcast at the moment, and you sort of, I would strongly recommend you to dive into reading, eventually to become an advocate reader, because it really will change perspectives. It will change your viewpoints. It will just expand, your horizon. I've got one watch out item before I close, and that is actually too much reading can lead to an overload of information. And what I found in 2018, although it was great that I was getting through a book a week, and it really changed my trajectory, there wasn't enough action. There wasn't enough execution, right? And that came after. That came in 2019, 2020, and where we are today. But it was way too much information, right? And so it's really about finding the right balance, or striking the right balance between getting the information you need and taking action on what you read. And I think that's how you further empower yourself, and I think that's how you further you make a lot more meaning of actually what you're reading. It's very easy to read and forget what you've read unless you actually put it into action. So my name is Pabilo Timbo. Thank you for listening. I hope you found that piece valuable. For those who are reading, maybe you can resonate with some of those points. For those who actually want to get into reading, I strongly urge you to. And please engage with us on our Instagram page on Take Flight Podcasts. And if you've got any questions or any thoughts, always send anything in the comments. But you can also email us at takeflightpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and speak to you soon.
Take off, take